So, today we're diving into something fascinating. We're going to look at a community in absolute crisis, but we're doing it through the eyes of one of the sharpest minds in history, Thomas Aquinas. We'll see how his breakdown of ancient Corinth gives us this timeless blueprint for unity that honestly feels like it could have been written for us today.
Think about it. It's a totally modern question, right? You see it with startups, social movements. You even see it with bands. Something just explodes. It gets popular overnight. But that explosion often comes with some serious growing pains because it pulls in all kinds of people with very different ideas and agendas.
Well, this is exactly what went down in the early Christian church in Corinth. Corinth was this booming, wealthy port city, a real melting pot of cultures. And when this new faith took hold there, it spread like wildfire. But that same energy and diversity, it also sparked a completely different kind of fire. Just total internal chaos.
So Aquinas, when he's commentating on the Apostle Paul's letter to these Corinthians, he doesn't just make a list of their problems. No, he's much more methodical. He's like a doctor diagnosing a patient, trying to find the single underlying disease that's causing all these different ugly symptoms.
And wow, the symptoms were bad. The community was literally tearing itself apart into fan clubs for different leaders. You had rampant arrogance, some truly shocking immorality. People suing each other in public courts. They were even humiliating the poor during what was supposed to be a sacred shared meal. For Aquinas, these weren't a bunch of separate problems. No, they were all just rashes breaking out from the same core infection.
So what was that infection? What was the root cause of all this? Well, Aquinas drills down and shows that Paul identified this fundamental clash of worldviews. See, the Corinthians were trying to build their community using the values of the world around them: status, power, influence. But Paul was calling them to something completely different, a value system that was totally upside down.
And right here, you can see that clash in black and white. The world celebrates a great speech, powerful connections, a noble family name. But Paul, as Aquinas explains, comes in preaching what he calls the foolishness of a crucified Messiah. He says God deliberately chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong, so that nobody could brag about themselves, but only about God. I mean, this was a direct assault on everything the Corinthians valued.
And this leads to a really key distinction Paul makes, the difference between what he calls the unspiritual person and the spiritual one. Aquinas helps us see that if you're only operating on worldly wisdom, these divine truths just don't compute. They sound like, well, foolishness, nonsense. But the spiritual person is working with a different logic, a different perspective. And the Corinthians' big problem was that they were stuck in that worldly mindset, and that was the source of all their division. But Paul doesn't just leave them with a diagnosis. He gives them a prescription, a way forward. And Aquinas highlights these two really powerful metaphors that Paul uses as a blueprint for how to rebuild this broken community. It's like a construction guide for turning all that chaos back into something whole. Okay, so the first blueprint is all about architecture. The church is a building, and Aquinas really hammers on Paul's main point here. There is only one foundation you can build on, and that is Jesus Christ. Period. So those leaders they were idolizing, like Paul and Apollos, they're not the foundation. They're just fellow construction workers. And the materials you use to build, they matter. You can use gold and silver, things like virtuous works, or you can use wood and hay, flimsy stuff like worldly attachments. Because in the end, a fire is going to come and test the quality of everyone's work. But, a building is just stone and wood. It's static. It doesn't breathe. So Paul's next metaphor is so much more dynamic, so much more alive. He shifts from architecture to biology. The community isn't just a structure, it's a living, breathing body.
And this is where Paul drops this absolutely brilliant rhetorical question. Aquinas sees this as a direct, surgical strike against the Corinthians' pride and their factions. They were all fighting to be the most important part, right? Everybody wanted to be the eye. But if everyone's an eye, the body is blind to everything else, and it can't survive.
So the message here is crystal clear. In a body, diversity isn't a problem to be managed. It is absolutely essential for survival. The foot can't say it doesn't need the hand. What's more, the parts we might think are less glamorous are actually the ones we protect the most. Now, for a culture obsessed with status, this was a radical thought. Your value isn't tied to your function. It's tied to the simple fact that you belong to the whole.
Okay, so we've got a building and we've got a body. But what's the engine? What's the lifeblood that flows through it all and makes the different parts actually care for one another? Aquinas zooms in on Paul's ultimate answer, the one single ingredient that makes all this unity even possible.
And look, this isn't just some pretty poetry you hear at a wedding. For Aquinas, this is a killer theological argument. Paul is saying that even the most amazing, spectacular spiritual gifts, the very things the Corinthians were so proud of, are literally just meaningless noise if they aren't powered by love, by what he calls charity.
I mean, just think about the most incredible gifts you can imagine. The ability to prophesy, having all knowledge, having faith so strong it could literally move mountains. Paul argues, and Aquinas breaks it down for us, that without love as the prime mover, they are all worth absolutely nothing. It's like love is the essential operating system. Without it, all the other amazing apps and programs, they just don't run. They're just lines of impressive but totally useless code. So, at this point you might be thinking, okay, but why? Why go through all this trouble? Why try to love people who are difficult? Why try to build a community when it's so incredibly hard? Well, Aquinas shows us that Paul wraps up his entire argument with the ultimate motivation, the final unifying hope that makes it all worthwhile.
Remember, these people were dealing with a ton of pressure, both from inside and outside. Paul had to give them a reason, a real reason, to keep going. He had to show them that their struggle to be unified, to be holy, wasn't for nothing. It was all tied to this incredible promise that completely redefined everything they thought they knew about life and death.
And this is it, the ultimate payoff, the resurrection. Paul lays out this incredible contrast. What is sown in the ground, perishable, weak, dishonored, will one day be raised imperishable, powerful, and glorious. Aquinas explains that this is the guarantee. This is the promise that all their hard work, their struggle for love and unity against all that worldly pride, it is not in vain. It's the ultimate hope that binds them all together.
Which brings us right back to today and leaves us with this question. Aquinas, reading Paul, diagnosed the Corinthian crisis as a sickness of pride. This deep conflict between worldly status on one side and selfless communal unity on the other. So, where do we see that exact same conflict playing out right now? In our own communities, in our jobs, in our world? It's a timeless question, one that's rooted in a very, very ancient scandal.